All right there, everyone. More bad news for Angela Merkel. Now the Bulgarian prime minister has called for Europe to close its borders, imprison illegal immigrants, and deport them en masse back to Africa and the Middle East. That's what we'll be talking about on today's video. We reported last week on the European summit that was called to basically avert the collapse of Angela Merkel's brittle coalition in Berlin. Just briefly, a couple of weeks back, Merkel's own interior ministers, the head of the key coalition partner for her, the Christian Social Union in Bavaria, he basically gave Merkel an ultimatum. Either get rid of this fresh crop of migrants and refugees from our borders, or, we're going to go ahead and work with Austria to secure the borders without you, which would in turn require Merkel to fire him for insubordination and hence collapse her coalition. And so an emergency European summit was scheduled to try to find other nations that would be willing to take in the migrants and refugees and salvage, well, what's left of Merkel's political credibility. But when they met, it was very apparent that the nations like the Visegrad Four, Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic and Slovakia, along with Austria and Italy, and the Nordic nations such as Denmark and Sweden, they weren't going to have anything to do with taking in these migrants and refugees. They certainly weren't going to agree to anything even remotely resembling immigration quotas as mandated from Brussels. And so the meeting concluded really with nothing for Merkel. In fact, Merkel's interior minister was ready to resign after the summit, basically saying that nothing in the least was accomplished. But Merkel was able to avert that disaster of having him resign and the collapse of her coalition for now by saying that, in effect, that there were informal agreements among several nations at the summit that they would temporarily take in these refugees. Nevertheless, nation after nation are lining up and basically saying they want nothing to do with anything from the summit. And the latest nation to distance itself from Merkel is Bulgaria. In fact, the Prime Minister of Bulgaria, Bojko Borisov, has come out of that meeting calling for a very simple solution to the entire migrant crisis in Europe, okay? And that very simple solution involves 3 steps. Close the borders, detain illegal immigrants who made it past the borders, and deport them back to their country of origin. What a genius, right? Now, one of the reasons why Borisov spoke out is because one of the solutions to the political problems faced by Germany's Angela Merkel was what's called the Dublin Regulation. And Dublin Regulation involves sending immigrants and refugees back to the European state where they first crossed the border. And unfortunately, that means nations like Bulgaria, along with Greece and Italy. Well, the Prime Minister of Bulgaria made it absolutely clear that Bulgaria would not accept any such plan. It's just another form of dictated immigration quotas. These are quotas coming in through the back door, as it were. And there's no way on earth that Bulgaria would agree to anything like that. And what the Bulgarian Prime Minister made clear was that, hey, look, these migrants wouldn't be passing through Bulgaria if it weren't first for Angela Merkel and her open borders policy mandated from Brussels. It was Merkel that invited the world to invade Europe. And it is Merkel that is responsible for them, not Bulgaria. Now, if you don't know, Bulgaria is one of the European nations that's turned to the hard right over the last year and a half or so. In November 2016, just a week or so after Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, Bulgaria elected their own nationalist populist as president of their nation. And then in March of 2017, you had the conservative rightist Gerb party. It's GERB, which are the initials that stand for coat of arms. That conservative party won their national elections along with a coalition of so-called far-right parties that formed an alliance called the United Patriots. And so Bulgaria has since been ruled by a nationalist right coalition. And of course, the United Patriots are staunchly anti-migrant, they're anti-Turkish, they're very pro-nationalist, pro-populist, pro-traditionalist. And so there's no way that Bulgaria is going to even remotely be an ally with Merkel in her quest for globalist-inspired open borders. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that Bulgaria is completely Eurosceptic or anti-EU. Scholars have noticed that one of the interesting differences between the nationalist right in Eastern Europe and the nationalist right in Western Europe is that the Eastern European parties, the so-called far-right parties, generally do not share the intense Euroscepticism of the nationalist right in Western Europe. For example, none of the nationalist right parties, the so-called far-right or radical right parties, not a single nationalist party in Eastern Europe is calling for a referendum or a petition to exit the EU, akin to what we saw, say, with the Brexit, or talks of Frexit in France, or Swexit in Sweden, or what the League was proposing in Italy. And one of the major reasons for that, of course, is the fall of the Berlin Wall and the whole notion that national sovereignty for nations formerly behind the Iron Curtain was associated with alliances with the West, and particularly with Brussels, right? Alliances with Western Europe and Western European institutions meant freedom from Soviet rule. The whole political process from the early 90s onwards was to get out from under the shadow of communism, and that meant turning to the West. But that said, as Viktor Orban of Hungary has been arguing so passionately over the last several years, Central and Eastern Europe are now experiencing their own European renaissance, such that while they don't necessarily disparage or want to bring down the EU, they certainly don't believe they are dependent on Brussels anymore. That's for sure. Central and Eastern Europe are rediscovering their culture, their customs, their traditions as absolutely essential for the revitalization of their national sovereignty. For example, for Bulgaria, this means rediscovering its Orthodox Christian tradition, which they are doing big time. Back in the 1990s, about 60% of Bulgarians identified themselves as Orthodox Christians. Today, it's over 75%. In fact, you have polls that indicate that the Orthodox Church is the single most trusted institution in Bulgaria. And so Central and Eastern Europe are rediscovering their culture, their customs, and traditions as absolutely essential for the revitalization of their national sovereignty. And unfettered immigration, the kind being mandated by the quotas coming out of Brussels since 2015, is absolutely inconsistent with just such a revitalization. If you are a regular viewer of this channel, you know our saying, open borders means open values. Open borders means open values. And the Bulgarian people want nothing to do with open borders. Now, while Bulgaria is not a member of the Visegrad Four, of course, which is Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, and Slovakia, while it's not a member of the officially of the Visegrad group, Bulgaria has instituted virtually identical border security policies as those respective countries. The prime minister there, along with Viktor Orban of Hungary and Matteo Salvini of Italy, is calling for the EU to finance the border security for the frontline nations that are bearing a disproportionate burden of immigration due to Merkel's open-ended invitation. And he's calling for processing centers and refugee camps to be set up outside of Europe, most likely in northern African nations such as Algeria, Egypt, Libya, Morocco, Niger, Tunisia. And it does appear that this is what they got out of the summit. Nations like Hungary and Austria and Italy and Bulgaria went in wanting to leave the meeting with the absolute guarantee that the borders of Europe would be closed and secured with stringent security enforcement on the one hand, and a guarantee that the days of immigration quotas mandated from Brussels are over, guaranteeing that migrant camps would not be forced on any member nation of the EU, which of course then lent itself to the idea of some kind of refugee processing center program outside of Europe, in this case, Northern Africa. Those were the fundamental concessions that they wanted from Merkel. And based on what they're saying, they got them. based on what Merkel's saying they got him. Bulgaria is making it clear that it will stand up for secure Europe, with refugee processing centers outside their borders and the end of any notion of immigration quotas coming from Berlin. And so it does appear that the recent European summit is shaping up to be more and more a clear historical fixed point when we can look back and see how the European Union was transformed from a secular globalist superstate to looking more like a league of sovereign nations, celebrating and indeed defending the cultural and traditional uniqueness of European civilization. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe. Click on that Patreon link below. Become a monthly supporter of this channel. And help us to continue to analyze current events in light of conservative trends so that you can personally and professionally flourish. God bless.